Okay, we're up to the brackets in Eis Vav. So we were explaining the different levels of P'tiyah b'derech Milchama. The different levels where the P'tiyah is coming after a struggle, after engaging the opponent, the way it is in Avodas Hashem. So the first level was Tefillah. That's what it says in most of the Maamarim, that the standard example of P'tiyah BeShalom is learning Torah, because learning Torah is not engaging with the world, it's learning in Torah about worldly matters, and that accomplishes the Birurim. And the standard example of P'tiyah b'derech Milchama is Tefillah, because in Tefillah the person has to convince the Nefesh HaBahamis, has to engage the Nefesh HaBahamis. So here the Rebbe said, but if we go more specifically, Tefillah, the person is also detached from the world. It's not a real struggle. P'tiyah b'derech Milchama is eating, because when a person eats and he has to actually taste the food, he has to taste the worldly pleasure and still fight against it, that he shouldn't be immersed in it, he should be immersed in serving the Eibishter, so that's a real struggle. More specifically, when the person is eating, so he's fighting against the food. The real engagement is maso matan, is in business, where a person is fully engaged with the world, with his business, and yet it has to be in a way that he's serving the Eibishter. So that's levels that the real P'tiyah b'derech Milchama is maso matan. So the Rebbe says it here in the brackets, v'yesh leimar. With this we could explain what's explained often in Chassidus. Zeu gamatam, this is the reason al zeh, sheklolos habirurim nikroim b'shem Canaan. Chassidus, it says, Avedas habirurim, the whole Aveda that we have in the world to be mevar, to elevate the nitzitzis that are there in Gashmias, is referred to as Canaan. And because of Avedas habirurim, we're called with the name Canaan. Why Canaan? It says in Chassidus, the Pirush Canaan hu Seicher. The word Canaan, besides being the name of a nation, is also a word that means a businessman. It brings from Psukim. And because a Jew in the world has the business of elevating the nitzitzis in the world, Avedas habirurim, so therefore it's called Canaan. So the Rebbe says, why specifically Canaan, why business? Because Avedas habirurim is mainly contained in this aspect of business dealings where the person has to fully engage with his worldly endeavors. Ki ikar habirurim shebederech hislabshos, the main birurim in a way of hislabshos, of engagement. That's what Avedas habirurim is. Who b'maso matan is in business dealings, like we said, and therefore the general name for birurim is Canaan. V'nimtza. So now that we said there's different levels in a Milchama itself, so now we're going to tie them together. In the beginning of the Maamar, we said that there's different types of Milchama. There's a Milchama, as opposed to Shalom, where there has to be a struggle. But there could be a Milchama where the combatants are from a distance from each other and they're shooting arrows at each other. There's a second level where there's a Milchama Shel Cherev, where they're using swords and spears, and they have to come much closer, and that's a more intense struggle, it's a more risky war. And then the ultimate struggle is when they actually physically engage each other, when they're wrestling each other, when they're embracing each other, that's as close as they can come, but it's the most intense struggle. That's what we said in the beginning. Now we said Beruchnius, there's the three levels of Milchama, which is the Milchama that's there in davening, which is not a real Milchama, it's not a real engagement, the engagement of eating and drinking, and the engagement of business. So the Rebbe says, V'nimsa sha'milchama da'achila, the engagement that's there in eating and drinking, where you're dealing with Gashmias, but the dealing with it is in a way that you're fighting to detach yourself from it, not to actually experience it. You're fighting against the physical experience. Hidugmas ha'milchama b'cherev is similar, if we want to compare it to one of the three categories of a physical war, that's comparable to a war with a sword, where on the one hand there's a certain closeness, on the one hand eating and drinking is closeness compared even to davening, but it's a closeness that still retains a certain distance, like fighting with a sword. It's not a physical engagement. And that's what we find, like we quoted before. The Zayar makes this exact equation. That it,
Eating and drinking is not a physical engagement.
no. We said it's not a physical engagement because the preoccupation of the one who's eating and drinking is, I'm trying to detach myself from the physical pleasure. From the,
What we want to taste, we want the beautiful physical taste.
no, we don't. No, we want to serve Hashem. We want to. We want. What's the avodah of davening? What's
You're talking about Birurim now when
birurim? That when a person, the reason why we eat is for birurim. We want to separate the taste and the spirituality. The spirituality is what?
the average person eating.
We're talking about the average person who deep down is a tzaddik. It says va'amich kulam tzaddikim, and therefore when he eats, he's working to eat in the proper way for the sake of Hashem. So it says, we quoted the Zayar, it says, Nama apum char b'leichel. The Zayar makes that exact comparison. Eating bread is on the tip of the sword. So the Gemara makes this comparison between eating and fighting with the sword. Now the Rebbe says that's exact, that's precise, because the war of eating and drinking where the person is close on the one hand, but it's a closeness where you're still retaining a certain difference, is exactly like that category of a war with a sword where there's a closeness, but still a certain distance. Like we said before, that even though the war with a sword, is fought in close proximity between the two sides. That's the difference, like we said, between a war with a sword or a war with bows and arrows, where they're from a much further distance. It's just a closeness in space, but they're still fighting each other. They're not physically embracing each other. The highest level, the closest level of Muhammad, the strongest level of engagement, is the war that's there in business dealings. That's the war of krav that we said. Krav implies the greatest closeness, the closeness that's there when there's a physical struggle and embracement and embracing each other. That's the struggle that's there, beruchnis, in business dealings. Shakirov, the kirov that's implied in the word krav, is a struggle that's leirak b'makim el sheshnei halechmim mechabkim zazah, where the two combatants are embracing each other, are grasping each other, kanal barucha, like we said in the beginning of the Maamar. So just to point out, the Rebbe put together the correspondence between the last two levels that we said. Eating and drinking is like a war with a sword. Business dealings is like a war that's krav, that's an actual physical wrestling. And seemingly, tefillah, davening, which is also a struggle, usually that's the example, but the Rebbe said that's the struggle from the greatest distance, because the person during his davening is detached from worldly concerns. So that would be l'ch'eira, even though that's not spelled out, similar to the war with a bow and arrow, that's the furthest distance and the least danger for the ones who are fighting. So now we're going to come back to the question in the beginning of the Maamar, and the question in many of the Padah BeShalom Maamarim, that seemingly the very words of the pasuk are contradictory. So Padah BeShalom by definition means there's no enemy to begin with. Padah BeShalom means I don't have an opponent, I don't have a risk, I'm not being threatened. And mikravli, being redeemed from a war, means I'm being redeemed from a war. And from a war that's the most intense and dangerous and threatening war. So how could there be a Padah BeShalom mikravli? It says, now that we explained Beruchni is the levels of krav and the levels of shalom, it says, V'zeu Padah BeShalom nafshi mikravli. The idea of Padah BeShalom nafshi mikravli, that even though there's a war, we're describing it as Padah BeShalom, is shegam avodas habirurim shebederech krav. That even the avodas habirurim, even the preoccupation with birurim, that by definition is in a manner of krav, is in a manner of closeness where the person is being engaged, being connected, is struggling with whatever physical things he's dealing with. V'leirak b'derech milchama la b'derech krav. It's the ultimate war, not just a war in a general sense, but a close war, a close engagement. On that, the pasuk says that even a mikravli tia ba'ofen de Padah BeShalom should be in a manner of Padah BeShalom. Shalom b'tachlis hashleim was the ultimate shalom, which means that there's no opponent to begin with. Ka'ashalom shahaya b'mei shleimah, like it was by Shleimah HaMelech, that there was no possibility of any enemy uprising against him. Well, l'mayla yeser, and even more than that, ka'ashalom shia la'asad laveh, like the shalom that will be when Mashiach comes, that we said is even surpasses the shalom that was by Shleimah HaMelech, that then the enemies themselves are all transformed to good. What does this mean, l'cheira, simply said? Because we said Padah BeShalom means there's no opponent to begin with, right? Mikravli means that I'm struggling, I'm fighting a very intense struggle. I could be redeemed at the end. How could there be a mikravli? There's a struggle, there's the most intense war, and we're saying it's Padah BeShalom, that I'm not dealing with an enemy to begin with. So seemingly the Rebbe is saying the way it is beruchnius, the way we're explaining all these concepts in Avedas Hashem, so we can understand it. Avedas HaBirurim, dealing with the world, dealing with business, where a person has to be most intensely immersed in his business dealings and thinking about it and engaging it, by its definition, usually is a krav. It's a struggle. It means I'm thinking about the world, I'm focusing on it. Like the Rebbe brought earlier, Nasasa v'nasata be'emunah, in order for my business dealings to be al pitera, I have to be engaging them. Usually, by definition, that's a descent. That means I'm going away from my spiritual level that I am when I'm davening and when I'm learning Torah, and I'm involving myself with worldly matters. And therefore, there's more danger involved. Therefore, there's more risk. Therefore, I need a padiyah. But a padiyah, redemption. I need to be saved. But there could be a way that a person goes down into the world in a way that even though I'm dealing with business and I'm thinking about the business calculations, nevertheless, the way that I'm thinking about it is, because this is the way what I have to do because Hashem wants me to do it, me and my mindset, I never separated myself from my complete connection with the Eibishter. It's Padah BeShalom mikravli, my krav, my engagement in a dealing that by itself is a struggle, is in a way that for me it's no struggle, it's Padah BeShalom, because I'm completely remaining with the level, like we're going to say, of Yechida. It says, Vatam lozeh, how could it be? What is the ingredients that kravli, that the war should be in a way of Padah BeShalom? Hu ke'ahemshech bekasav, like the pasuk continues, ki berabim hayu imadi. Why? What's the reason? What enables that mikravli should be in a manner of Padah BeShalom? Berabim hayu imani, many were with me. That all the Padah BeShalom Maamarim explain. What does this mean? What's the Aveda, the ruchniistic idea of berabim hayu imadi? Idea Aveda de berabim hayu imadi. Shehi his eirus v'gilui hayechida kemevur baruch b'drushanal de balagula. The idea of berabim hayu imadi is revealing and accessing our yechida shebenefesh that we spoke about earlier in the Maamar, the bechol moedecha. Through having that level, that realization that yechida means we're alone with Hashem, and there's no other existence except Hashem. Through this eirus v'gilui hayechida, the kol echad ve'echad mi Yisrael, every single person, b'koichei la'oirer u'legales ha'yechida shebei. Every single Jew has the ability to awaken and reveal his Yechida Shebenefesh. That's the Avodah of Berabim Hayu Imadi. And when we reveal the Yechida, and when we're coming and approaching even the business dealings, the most intense struggle with the mindset of Yechida, Hine al Yideze Nase Padah BeShalom Nafshi, that causes that even though I'm dealing with something that should be a struggle, it's Padah BeShalom. Padah BeShalom means that it's not a struggle to begin with. Nafshe shel ha'adam ha'eved, the person, my nefesh, the nefesh of the one who's involved in this struggle is nifta, it's redeemed in a manner of shalom, that it's not really a struggle. Dagam she'oisek b'inyanei ha'elam. B'chdei levareram be'efen shel krav. Translating that, what does that mean practically? That even though the person is involved in business, whatever worldly matter, with the purpose to be mevar them, that's supposed to be a krav. By definition, birurim, my business dealings is an engagement. Mikol makim, it's Padah BeShalom, it's to begin with not a struggle. Lo yiyeh nitfas bazeh, through the mindset of Yechida, the manner of this seeming engagement is that the person is not engaged. I'm not dealing with the world. By me, it's still Yechida. All that exists is the Eibishter. V'apdiya shaloi tia b'shalom. 1 second, he's redeemed in a way of shalom. V'ad l'shalom b'tachos hashleimus, the complete shalom, that there's no opponent to begin with.
I'm confused. You said practically it means when you're in business or you have to put your mind very tensely on what's going on, because even the fine points you lose everything. The last thing you're thinking of, I'm joining my mechira now, working on that. You'll make mistakes everywhere. So I'm not clear on how he means practically.
So here's l'cheira, the simple example of what he's saying. Is we know a famous story. There was a chassid of the Alter Rebbe. His name was Rabbi Kletzker. And sometimes the Rebbe says the story about a different chassid of the Alter Rebbe, that he was a big businessman. He had a very, very complicated business with logs, with wood, that was done to big business. And he was going through his accounts one day and making all the calculations. And on the bottom line of the calculation, he wrote Ein Eid Muvadeh. Nothing exists besides Hashem. He didn't make any mistakes. By him, he was involved in business, because that was his purpose. That was part of what he was supposed to do. The involvement in business wasn't that he said, okay, I have to lower myself from my level of Ein Eid Muvadeh and deal with business, and then there's going to be a struggle that even while I'm in business, it shouldn't distract me or take me away or lessen and diminish my connection with Hashem. The involvement in business was part of his connection with Hashem. It never took away. He didn't have to walk away from the Yechida and be in a dangerous way and still be saved. That was part of his Yechida. That's Yechida, I'm alone with Hashem. Part of my aloneness with Hashem is doing what Hashem wants. And what Hashem wants includes I'm doing my business, but my involvement in business is never anywhere apart from the Ein Eid Muvadeh. Therefore, the conclusion, the bottom line of the accounting, of the calculation, still was Ein Eid Muvadeh. So therefore, it's mikrav, and even though it's mikrav, it's still Padah BeShalom. And he says even more than that. So the person is Padah BeShalom nafshi, my nefesh, the soul of the one who's doing this krav. He's redeemed in a way of shalom, meaning that even though he's involved in seemingly the most intense krav, for him it was never a struggle or a threat. And moreover, so the meaning of this Padah BeShalom mikravli says even more than that. Shegam p'dias hanitzeitzes shebeinyanei ha'elam, not only the redemption of the person who's being involved in this aveda is in a way of shalom, but the nitzeitzes, the sparks that he's coming to elevate, tia b'shalom, will also be in a way of shalom. Birabim hayu imadi. Now that's another interpretation. Birabim hayu imadi, the many were with me. The many refers to the many sparks that are there in Golos, they're imprisoned in worldly matters, and the person is coming to elevate them, to liberate them, to take them out. And this P'tiyas HaNitzeitzes is also in a way of Shalom, Shegam HaNitzeitzes. Even these Nitzeitzes, these sparks, Shahayu Tchila, B'Bchinas Rabim, that were Berabim, they were in diversity, in a state of diversity. They were in a state of Rabim, of pluralism. Ki hayu begalus b'Rishus harabim, because they were imprisoned in Rishus harabim, Turei de Pruda, and the mountains of diversity, in Elam Haza, in worldliness. They become imadi. Berabim, these nitzeitzes, this state of diversity became part of me, became with me, meaning they're nechlalim, they become included and contained B'nishmasei shel ha'adam ha'mevareram, in the nefesh and the neshama of the person who's involved with being mevarer them, hayu imadi, they were with me, va'ad shehem nechlalim ba'yechidah shabay, to the point that they become included in his yechidah. These nitzitzis become part of my yechidah. Yechidah by definition is shalom. Yechidah by definition, like we said, ein kenegda l'umaza, doesn't allow for an opponent. So the berabim, both the person himself and the nitzitzis that he's mevarer have a pediyah b'shalom. So the answer in this Maamar, and like I said, this is one of the basic questions of the Maamarim. Some of the Maamarim give other answers to this question. How could you have Padah BeShalom and Mikravli? This Maamar said, by understanding what it means in Avedas Hashem, so the krav, the war, is something, an act that by itself it should constitute a struggle. And nevertheless, the pasuk is saying, and there's a possibility of an aveda of Padah BeShalom Mikravli, that through tuning in and accessing the Yechidah, even an occupation that by itself should present a struggle could be done in a way of Padah BeShalom, in a way that we never deviate, we never step away from the Yechidah, from the mindset of Yechidah. In fact, this Shabbos is the Kinnis HaShluchim. This is the idea, really, of Shlichus. This is the Chiddush of the Rebbe's revolution in this generation of Shlichus. We know that there's many other Gedolei Yisrael that said, some of them said to the Rebbe that they can't. The Rebbe told other Rebbes that they should send out their Chassidim to communities and to villages that need a Rav and need a teacher. And they said, we can't send out. He's going to get lost. He's going to get swallowed up. Said we could send a kailo when there's 10 Chassidim together and they encourage each other and they support each other. The truth is, it's hard to understand. How could one guy go to a community, he's one against who knows how many, and stay the same as he was before, stay the same chassid? The answer is, this is Padah BeShalom, that the mikravli, the gili hayechidah, the Rabbi speaks in Parshas Chayesara. The definition of shlichus is that the person stays the same as he was before. When he stays the same as he was before, so even the krav, even something that's superficially, externally, according to its description, it should be a krav, it should be a struggle, is not a struggle, it's Padah BeShalom, because the one who's there didn't descend into it, he retains exact identity that he had beforehand, Yechidah Liyacht. V'yesh leimar. So the Rebbe adds to this. So this Maamar is a Maamar connected with Yud Kislev, the Geula of the Mittler Rebbe. He says, now that we understand the concept, the idea of Padah BeShalom, now we'll understand the relevance of this, the connection of this idea specifically with Yud Kislev, with the Mittler Rebbe. Shezeu gam hakesher v'hashaychus shel hageula de Yud Kislev v'de Yud Tes Kislev lahapasik Padah BeShalom nafshi. How does this connect with Yud Kislev? Dagam shapdia haisa mikrav. Even though the pediyah, the state of danger, of oppression that the Mittler Rebbe experienced, that necessitated the geula, was a krav, was the most intense struggle. Kailo gamzeh, the fact itself of the imprisonment of the Mittler Rebbe, and the details were all in a way of krav, all brought out the most intense threat, the most intense suffering, including the fact shahamaiser, the imprisonment of the Mittler Rebbe, ba al yidei hamalshinus shel elu shahaya lehem yachas shel kiruv, the malshinus of the Mittler Rebbe came from family members, from relatives, from people who had a certain closeness. And the suffering from that, therefore, that they brought about, this unpleasant experience is much worse than if it's a stranger who causes it. These are people who should be close. This, that the imprisonment came from such people who have this closeness, who yirida of itzar gadol, this is a much bigger descent, is a much bigger suffering, much bigger pain. So this is a krav. This, on one hand, should be a krav, should intensify the struggle. Va'afa pikein haisa hapediyah b'shalom u'b'shleimus. The pediyah, nevertheless, the krav didn't have any residual effect. It didn't have any trace. The pediyah was one in which brought out a bigger gili of chassidus, so a true shalom. Va'ad shezeh nase hakdama v'hachana, this liberation of the Mittler Rebbe on Yud Kislev became a preparation, became a first step l'tachlis hashleimus sheyiyah la'asid lavei, to the ultimate shalom that will be la'asid lavei, to the gili alikus that doesn't leave possibilities of an opponent. So on the one hand, the state that the Mittler Rebbe was in seemed to imply a big Helam v'Hester and Alikus, that a Rebbe has to endure such suffering, that people who are relatives, who are close, are descending so low to bring about this imprisonment. And nevertheless, the Padah was in a way that not just, we're saved, the Padah was in a way that Chassidus reached greater status, reached a greater shleimus, and it became a stepping stone to the ultimate shleimus, to the ultimate shalom, that everything, that the negative will be transformed to good. So that's why the Maamarim with Yud Kislev are connected with Padah BeShalom.
Which was there that it was Moshe on the Alter Rebbe? It's not going to mean.
No, the Mittler Rebbe. By the Alter Rebbe was Misnagdim, by the Mittler Rebbe was relatives. What? Misnagdim Shemspacha, yeah, but they were relatives. Shal Yedei ha yafutzu meinesecha chutza, through yafutzu meinesecha chutza. Says, how is this a stepping stone? How is this a preparation for Mashiach? Because through the Hafatz Samayanis, shehuschal beikar b'Yud Tes Kislev, that started mainly by the Gula of Yud Tes Kislev. That's why both of these Gulas are connected with Padah BeShalom, because what happened by these Gulas laid the groundwork for the preparation for Mashiach. First of all, through Yud Tes Kislev, that started in general Hafatz Samayanis chutza. Ubefrat ha'idei ha'aveda shel Baal HaGula. The Yud Kislev, and especially this was enhanced, was increased through the Aveda, the Gula of Yud Kislev, the Aveda of the Mittler Rebbe, that increased the manner of spreading Chassidus, Hafatz Samayanis Shaloi, Haisa Ba'efen Shal Recheves Anar, that his Hafatz Samayanis was in a way with great abundance, with great breadth, that it's compared always to Recheves Anar, to a river that broadens and spreads out. Hainu Shehim Sheches Hamayan Ba'efen Shal Recheves Anar. The Rebbe says, what does that mean? It wasn't that the Mittler Rebbe added details, he took the Mayan, the source, the Nekuda, the essence of Chassidus, and that itself he made with the biggest abundance, with the biggest broadness, like the broadness of a river that has Recheves Anar. So the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe brought to this Hafatz Samayanis chutza was the greatest increase, the greatest intensity. This brings about, Hinei al Yidei Zeh, as the stepping stone for the ultimate Padah BeShalom. And therefore these Geulas that started off in a way of krav, started off with a very painful suffering, had in themselves the element of Padah BeShalom, because they themselves led to a Gili of Chassidus that doesn't have an opponent, and they led, and they were the stepping stones for the ultimate Gili, that al Yidei Zeh, through these Geulas, and through the Hafatz Samayanis chutza, the increases in Chassidus that were brought about by these Geulas bring to us Imar, the coming of Mashiach, the Malka Mashiach. So Sha'azi Shalom v'Shalva Amitim b'Tachlis Hashleimus, then will be the true Shalom, the true peace, that there is no possibility, all the opponents are transformed to good. V'Tayameh Chayim Zachu. And just like it says before Shabbos, Friday afternoon, we have to taste the dishes of Shabbos, so too now, even though so far we're still in Galus, but this ultimate state of Shalom, of tranquility that will be when Mashiach comes, we have to start tasting it now. Shemaschilim lite me'enza. We have a taste of this ultimate Shalom v'shalva eid b'mei ha'galus ha'achreinim, in these final days of Galus. Sheyichelim lis'asek, that everyone already now in the final days of Galus, before we have it in its completest form, is able to be occupied miteich menucha, with peace and tranquility, v'simcha v'tev levav, and simcha and happiness, in the aveda of yafutzu meinesecha chutza ba'efen de meisif v'heilech v'eir, in a way that we always add to it and increase in it. U'bekariv mamash niska l'layla kayem yar, bekariv mamash will have the time of the ultimate shalom. Then we said the opponents are transformed to good. That's contained in what the pasuk says about Mashiach, Laila Kayem Yar, that the night will shine like the day. The night, which represents the negative, will be transformed. Not just it's not going to be a night, that itself will have the illumination of the day, but be as Mashiach Tzidkenu.